Association in the United States, and our mission is to provide leadership for adult and continuing education. Our belief is that lifelong learning contributes to human fulfillment and to positive social change. So, our mission at AAACE is to help support adult educators across all different types of sectors. So, we focus not only on university based adult education, but also continuing education, community education, anything where there would be adults interacting in the educational process. Our mission is to support that. Within AAACE, we have different commissions that focus on different interest areas. So, for instance, we have a commission for professors, we have commission for international education. And so, my role at AAACE is I'm the director of the Commission for Distance Teaching and Learning. And the focus of our commission is really on online learning and teaching processes. So we're very passionate about online learning and love to talk about that. I'm excited to be able to be here today to tell you about it. Okay, I want to talk, just to set context, I want to talk a little bit about the university that I work for. And even though I'm here representing AAACE as a commissioner, my job is through Purdue University Global. I'm an associate dean with that organization. Purdue University Global is a part of the Purdue University system. And for those of you that aren't maybe familiar with Purdue, Purdue is a land grant institution based out of the state of Indiana. We are a part of that system that focuses only on online education, and our population is working adults. So while you may know Purdue as being a campus in Indiana and very focused on science, technology, engineering, our focus is a little bit different. We really focus on what we would call in the United States non-traditional students, those working adults. Our population is statistically predominantly female. They are statistically over the age of 30. And we also, in our organization, have a lot of focus on military students. About a third of our enrolled students have a military association. We are 100% online, well, nearly 100% online. We do have a few ground-based entry-level nursing programs, but all of our courses and programs are online and run online. Within Purdue Global, we have 5 different schools. We have a School of Business and Information Technology. We have a School of Health Sciences. We have a School of Nursing. We have a School of Social and Behavioral Sciences, and then also a School of Gen Ed to provide the general education support to the other schools. And then we actually also, within part of the university, have a Concord Law School. So we have a really broad, diverse range of programs. We also have a really diverse level of education. We do have doctoral programs, we have master's programs, we have graduate certificate programs, we have bachelor's programs, we have associate degree programs, and we even have undergraduate certificate programs. So a huge range for us, not only in the types of schools, but in the types of programs we offer. And we do not run on a traditional type of educational format. Most traditional universities run on a semester system where students take one semester of classes and then there's a break and a second semester. We actually run most of our programs on 10-week academic terms. So students typically are going to take 2 classes. Those last for 10 weeks, and then they have a week break, and then they move on to the next 10-week classes. Although we do have some classes that run on a 6-week format. And then we also have programs that run on what is called a competency-based format, where the students progress through the program as they're completing individual competencies that are set up. So it's a little bit more, it's not really self-paced, but they complete one task, and once they complete that task, then they move on to the new task. So that also is a range, a big range in terms of what we provide services to students. And part of what we believe at Purdue Global is that adults need flexible educational experiences and they need personalized educational experiences. And our programs are set up to allow for as much flexibility and personalization as we are realistically able to do within the confines of an educational system and the regulations that we all have to work within. So that's a little bit about Purdue Global. And I tell you all of that to say that my experiences are going to be very different than what Ayun and what Ramon shared, because we are already an online institution. So the great thing for us during this COVID pandemic is that we were pretty much prepared for the academic delivery, and we didn't need to change. We already have the infrastructure in place. All of our courses are built into one LMS, and we have strong systems in place to support that. Our students, for them, when the pandemic hit, nothing changed from an academic standpoint. Everything stayed the same. Our courses continued to run. We didn't have any interruptions. We didn't have to make any changes. Also, because we're online, most of our faculty and a lot of staff already worked from home. So we were very fortunate as an organization because we didn't have to go through the dramatic transitions that most universities or more traditional universities had to go through. We already had those things in place. Our folks were already working from the home environment. A lot of them were. And then the other strength that we had through this pandemic is that because of our experience in online education, we are available to provide support to those who are transitioning into remote work and education. So for me personally, that's been very fun. For my colleagues that were not used to working from home and were looking for some ideas on how to work from home and how to work in a virtual environment. And also even kind of outside of that, because all organizations are going virtual, being able to provide some training and talking to different organizations about how to work virtually, way to structure virtual teams and things like that has been really great opportunities and really strengths for us as an institution that we're able to kind of shift our education and educate people even how to cope with some of the changes they're having to manage through the pandemic. So that's been really fun, and it's been nice to be able to share some of those skills and knowledge with people. Just because we didn't have an immediate impact to our academic core and the way we were delivering coursework doesn't mean that we were without impacts. So we did have some immediate challenges when the pandemic hit. And one of those is that we do have support staff that had been working in office environments, and they had to transition to working from home. So much like I'm sure many of the rest of you, for people who had to transition working virtually, there were some big changes there, making sure that folks had the technology that they needed, that they had computer systems that could support what they needed to, that they had internet and modems in their homes, wireless in their home that would support what they needed to. Also, I don't know how many of you have noticed yet, but I'm guessing you have, working virtually is very, very different than working in a face-to-face environment. And what typically happens when people transition to working virtually is that they want to do the exact same things they did in a face-to-face environment, but they just want to do it over the phone or over video. That doesn't really work. We have to adapt what we're doing because virtual relationships are very different than face-to-face relationships. Now, for most of you that have been through that transition lately, you already had face-to-face relationships established with folks, and so that makes things a little bit easier. But for those of us who work 100% virtually and don't ever have face-to-face interactions with our students or with the other staff we're working with, there's definitely some change in communication patterns. And what I heard a lot from our support staff as they were transitioning is that it was weird for them because they were used to being able to drop into someone's office, or they were used to being able to see what was going on around them and adjust really quickly. You lose all of that context when you're in a virtual environment, and you have to figure things out by intentionally communicating with others. So there were some real changes for those folks and some transitions for them. Those of us who had already been working from home were sort of 2 steps ahead of those folks, and were able to kind of help bring them along. But it was interesting to see them go through that transition, and really to have to help them through that transition. And then in addition to that, as I already mentioned, because virtual teams have to be managed a little bit differently, there were some adjustments in management approaches. I talked to one of our managers who manages a team out of one of our offices, and she kept saying she felt so disconnected from her people because she wasn't physically seeing them every day and couldn't check in and couldn't see how they were reacting to things. So there is a transition there too when you're working from home. As a manager, being able to be more intentional about checking in, working with your folks, and trying to get a read on what's happening with everyone, because you don't know that unless you're intentional about it. In addition, because of that transition to working from home for some of those folks, there were also some adjustments to workflows. Because people weren't in offices, things that normally happen through the office environment had to be changed a little bit. And just as one example, my role with the university is to oversee clinical and practicums for the School of Health Sciences and the School of Social and Behavioral Sciences. And our team has an administrative assistant who was working out of an office 3 days a week. And a big reason she worked out of the office was to mail out contracts to our clinical partners. Well, when she got pulled out of the office, we all of a sudden lost our ability to send physical mailings to our partners. We could obviously still receive them, but then there was no one there to get them at the office. I mean, mail's still being delivered, but there wasn't anyone to go in and see the mail and get it distributed to the folks that needed it. So that presented some challenges for us, and we sort of had to problem solve through that and figure out how we were going to manage that. And I know there were many others. That's just one example, but that is a change in the workflow that had to be minor modified. It wasn't a big deal, but we just kind of had to figure out how to make it all work. The other big challenge for us as an institution is that our students are spread all over the world. Primarily, our students are in the United States, but we do have some students in other countries as well. And because we have a big military population, we have a lot of students that are maybe US residents, but they're overseas on military deployments or military bases. And because the United States is so large and there were impacts in different regions that were very different, that made it harder for us to manage. So again, as an example, in my role overseeing the clinical pieces of things, most of you have probably seen on your news that New York City was hit very, very hard. And the healthcare system in New York City was overwhelmed. So any of our clinical partners in New York City that had been hosting students had to immediately put a stop to that. Rightfully so. Their focus was on taking care of patients. Obviously, they didn't want extra people in environments where they could be exposed to the virus, and it obviously was not going to be the best of learning experiences for students because things were in such crisis mode. So our students who were doing clinical rotations lost their clinical rotations and couldn't complete those. And that obviously makes a huge difference in being able to finish their courses and finish their programs. So that was huge in New York and in other areas as well. But in some more rural areas, Arizona comes to mind. In the state of Arizona, there wasn't a lot of impact. We didn't lose any clinical sites in that state. As long as the regulations allowed and the states were open, we could allow students to continue to go to their clinical sites and complete experiences. So that left my team in a situation where we're managing all of these students who are in courses, but some are able to go to sites and some are not able to go to sites, and some are able to do what they need to do and some aren't able to do what they need to do. And we're actually still in that situation right now. We've got people kind of all over the board. We're really having to manage things, and we have from the beginning, based on individual geographic situations, and evaluating what's happening for that person in that area, and then making decisions based on that. So we haven't been able to have a one-size-fits-all approach for how we're managing some of these things. Those were some of our immediate challenges. On the operational side of things, just in terms of getting students enrolled and managing them, we're a very quick-paced university, as I mentioned. We do 10-week terms or 6-week terms, depending on the program. And so we have students starting continually in new programs. And one of the difficult things operationally is that when places in the United States started to go on lockdown, we couldn't get some of the supporting documentation we needed to get students enrolled. So things like transcripts from their high schools or other colleges, even from the military for those folks, we had trouble getting those. One of the processes my team manages is background checks for students who are going to be in a program where they need to be placed at a clinical site. We do a criminal background check as a part of the enrollment process. When court systems shut down in various states, we were not receiving background checks, and so that created some challenges for us in enrollments. CPR courses, again, for our students who are going out and doing clinicals, most CPR courses came to a halt, and that's a requirement for getting students prepared to go to clinicals. And then also their health appointments. A lot of our students, prior to being able to go to their clinical placements, have to submit immunization records and health records so we can make sure it's safe for them to be at their clinical site. And their medical clinics were shut down and were not taking routine appointments. So that created not direct impact to us in our courses, but it created a lot of operational types of things, again, that we're having to track, and we had to create some new temporary processes to manage those. I've already mentioned on the prior slide that clinical site placements have been probably our biggest challenge. Our entry-level nursing programs are located at campus locations, and those students have not been able to go out and get their hands-on skills training. And then for our online programs, for both health sciences, nursing, and psychology, all three of those schools, students in some places have not been able to go out and get their hands-on skills training. In some places they have. So again, we wind up in this situation where we have some students out doing what they need to do and they're fine, and other students that aren't. We also ran into some challenges where the clinical sites were allowing people to be there and to continue their training, but students didn't feel safe going into the clinical sites. So we also spent some time developing some alternative processes for those students. My dean and I felt very strongly that we should not be forcing students out into their clinicals if the students felt that it wasn't safe for them and they weren't comfortable with that because they either didn't want to be exposed or they had family that they were afraid of bringing exposure home to. So we had to work out some alternative arrangements for those students as well. And then kind of on the more administrative side, this is much less academic, but we are, again, a fast-paced university where we have students enrolling and starting classes every few weeks. And so there were changes in the number of inquiries and enrollments, or potential changes in inquiries and enrollment. And so for the folks who are in charge of getting students enrolled and getting them started in programs, there were some adjustments in operations for them as well. Long term then, over the course of this, some support challenges that we've seen. And this support actually extended not only to providing support to our students, but also to our faculty and to our staff. Because even though we were online and all of us were used to working online, many of us experienced changes in our internet access. So in my house, I went from working at home by myself all day to having my husband and my 2 college kids home, my husband working and my kids taking classes online. So my internet access became much less stable because there are now 4 of us drawing services from within the house. And that happened at every house on our block and throughout the community. So that demand on internet really changed some of the access and the stability for a lot of us. And then, especially on the student side for us, we had some students who would access the internet through public facilities, like maybe a public libraries where they went to do their work or things like that. Well, when everything closed down, those students didn't have that access anymore. So working with these students and the staff and the faculty when there were changes in access or when there was less stability became kind of a big support challenge that we had to work to make sure that we could get everybody stabilized and keep them moving forward. And then adding to that, one of the challenges in a virtual environment overall is that you have no visibility into what's happening with a student or a staff or faculty member's personal situation. So in an office environment or in a university environment, when a student comes in or a staff member comes in, you can maybe see by their body language that they're having a rough day or things aren't going well, or, you can pick up a lot on those nonverbal things. In the virtual environment, you don't have the opportunity to do that. So you could have a student or a staff member who's going through something really difficult, like being sick from COVID or having people at their house sick from COVID or having to care for someone that's COVID positive, and you have no idea that's happening with that person. So what can happen in a virtual environment is those folks can either fall off the radar or they kind of suffer silently and you have no idea that they're needing any kind of support. So that really creates some challenges in the virtual world as well. And what the best way to compensate for that, at least in my experience, is to really be intentional about reaching out and talking to people. Now, that still relies on them getting back to you if they have a concern they want to express and you can't force them to either respond to you or to tell you about their concerns. But at least if you're reaching out, hopefully it gives you some visibility. And the reason you want visibility into what's happening with folks is you want to be able to help them. If you know somebody, a student, for instance, is caring for a family member who's really sick from COVID, maybe we can be a little bit more flexible on how we approach their coursework or their due dates or how they're doing things. But if we don't know that they're going to need that help and that we have to adjust for them. So that's definitely a support challenge always in the virtual world, but certainly during the pandemic, it's been a heightened challenge. And then also, and these are situational stressors that probably most of you have seen, not only with your students, but also your faculty and staff as well. Things that are happening because of the situation, the overall loss of routines and predictability for people. Some of us who are a little bit type A and maybe like to control our schedules and have things blacked out, that's all kind of gone out the window over the last couple of months because we've had to roll with whatever's happening and continual changes, not only in our day-to-day, but in things that are happening overall within society. And that can be really disconcerting for a lot of people. At least here in the United States, and I'm sure it's the same in Europe, many people have children and spouses at home. And so maybe for our students, they did their studying where their children were at school. And now their children are no longer going to school and they're having to homeschool their children and try to keep up with their own studies as well. So those kinds of situational stressors have created a lot of challenges for folks. Some folks have lost jobs. And so for some of our students, those job losses create challenges for them with school in that they're trying to decide how to pursue a new job, or maybe they're worried that they don't have the funding to continue through their academic program. And then on the flip side of that, we've also had a lot of students who've had increased job demands, depending on their field they're in. Obviously, some of our nursing students and even some of our business folks, depending on what their role is, have had to work extra hours and long hours. And so that has taken away from their ability to engage in their schoolwork as well. And again, we don't necessarily have visibility into any of these situations unless the students tell us about them. So one of the important things we've had to do is be really intentional about reaching out and asking. And when we see students maybe aren't participating in their classes or they're not interacting in the same way, having to reach out and ask and see if there's something we can do to assist them. So ongoing challenges, uh, the continued disparity between the geographical regions for us continues to be a challenge for me, because I oversee those criminal background checks that I mentioned earlier. I still have a couple of states that our court systems haven't opened, and so we have background checks back for all but a handful of students, and we have to figure out how to manage those and what approaches we can take to, number one, protect the student, because the reason the background checks are there is to make sure that they're going to be cleared to move forward in an academic program, but then also not throw up roadblocks for a student that's something that they don't have any control over. So these students that are in the places where the courts are closed, it's not their fault that we can't get those background checks. And we don't want to keep them from continuing their education. So we've had to really work with the deans to figure out a balance for that and make sure that we're doing what we can to take good care of the students, but also honoring the reason our policies are in place in the first part. And those disparities between the geographical regions, I think, are going to continue for some time. And if you can believe the national media here in the US, I think it's going to be kind of a long-term thing that we're really going to have to, as an institution, kind of pay attention and personalize some of those things based on where a student is located. The fears and anxieties regarding a potential second wave of the virus, I'm not sure if you guys are hearing that in Europe, but we're definitely hearing in the United States that because things are starting to open back up and most places are shooting for more of a return to normal in the fall, they're anticipating a second wave of the outbreak. And there's a lot of fear and anxiety about that and how we're going to manage that and what will happen. In terms of allowing our students to move forward. And, the concerns specifically for me and my team is we get students back out to their clinical sites, get them started on stuff, and then something else happens and we have to pull them out again, and it further delays their ability to complete their coursework. So that's an ongoing challenge we're having to work through. It's as you all know, it's really difficult because we don't know. And so we can sit around all day and talk about, well, if this happens, we're going to do this. And if this happens, we're going to do this, but we don't really know what's going to happen. And so in some regards, that feels like a lot of wasted energy that we're spending time thinking about things that we don't even know are or are not going to happen. So what we're trying to do with that is just to be smart and think about, okay, if this happens, how are we going to respond? What would we do the same as we did this first time around? And what do we need to maybe modify so that if there is a second wave, we can improve on how we handled it and do a better job than we did the first time around? And then, of course, there's a lot of anxiety about returning to normal, and people are anxious to do that, rightfully so. We all would like to go back to the way things were 6 months ago, but we also know that that is not without risks, and that's probably not going to happen. In terms of allowing our clinical students back to what was normal before, we already know from our healthcare systems in the United States that processes in many places are probably going to change for our students. And they're already within the United States, to get students into clinical sites was a lot of competition, and it could be really challenging to find the clinical placements that the students needed. We know that that's probably only going to get more challenging. And so we're going to have to continue to adapt our processes. There's a double-edged sword there, because obviously healthcare is super important right now and we need as many people out there as we can caring for patients. But if we can't get them into the sites to get their basic training, we can't graduate them and have them out help working with patients. So there's definitely going to be some adjustments, I think, across both the educational system and the healthcare system for how we work with those types of issues. Some benefits of this. I always like to figure out, where you can find positives. Ayun was saying that earlier. They try to create teaching experiences out of the pandemic. I think for us as an institution, the increased awareness of online education has obviously been a wonderful thing. Online education has always sort of been um, the secondary or the lesser um, type of education, at least stereotypically. It's been fun to see people understand that online can be much more than what maybe it has been thought about of stereotypically. So that's a great thing. Now, the flip side of that is that much of the online education that's been done as a result of COVID was maybe not the best designed and delivered most effectively. And not to point fingers at anyone who had to do that, but when you have to go from teaching face-to-face to teaching online in a matter of 24 hours, there's not a lot of planning and development time, and certainly that's important in delivering quality online courses. So there is a bit of a flip side there, that some people have had bad experiences with online, and maybe it wasn't a true experience because there wasn't the time and the opportunity to develop really, really solid coursework for those students. We have had some organizational adaptations within our organization that I think will help, across society, and even how we're meeting today in Zoom. That's a great example of a societal adaptation. Everyone knows Zoom now and knows how to work in Zoom. We've developed just new ways of being more creative and how we've connected with our students because of some of the limitations that we've had now, and how we've adapted in communicating with our staff as well, because we do have many more staff and faculty working from home than had been. And then again, I mentioned earlier, the opportunities to share expertise with others. I'm super passionate about online education and working in virtual teams, and there are many others in our university that are as well. And so opportunities like this, where you can share that information and help people understand maybe the online perspective or the virtual team perspective, have been really fabulous for us. So in looking ahead, as I wrap up, again, just preparing for continued change, I think the one thing that is inevitable is that we are going to have continued changes, and helping our students understand and adapt to that, but also giving strong support to our faculty and staff. I think in educational institutions, we focus a lot on our students, as we should, and taking care of them, but we have to stop and remember to take care of one another as well. Because if our faculty and staff aren't well cared for and they don't feel comfortable, they'll have a hard time serving our students. Also, I think professional organizations, things like this webinar today, where it brings people from several different countries together to talk about what we can do to help provide support. The professional organizations like AAAACE and UPCEA can look at the needs of their members and figure out how they can help their members develop skills. Most of us are getting this from our employers as well, but you can never have too much help and support in times like this, where there's dramatic change and people are really feeling unsure. The more that we can surround people and give them the assistance they need, the more likely it is that they'll be able to be successful, and that we'll be able to help our students be successful. So to wrap up, and that kind of goes with what I was just saying, it's literally true that you can succeed best and quickest by helping others. I think as educators, we all believe that. Ramon mentioned, sharing information and people getting together and doing that. And it's so important. Those of us that are experienced in online, being able to help others out, and those of you who are not experienced, being able to reach out and ask for that help and get some support. This should not be a situation where we're competing with one another and people are trying to get ahead. We should be all helping each other as institutions, so that we can all help our students, because that's the ultimate goal. And just real quick, I wasn't sure if my contact information was going to be shared, so I popped this slide in. Feel free to jot down my email address if you want to reach out to me individually. I would be absolutely happy to talk with folks. I love the connections and being able to learn from new people as well. I'm sure you all have things that you could share with me. So I'd love that if anybody wants to reach out. All right, and I will turn it back over.
So we had 3 presentations already, and now we are going to tackle the last one. I would like to introduce Sasha Crowley and Jennifer Good. They are both associate professors at Brandman University, US. I've learned that each of them, they work together, but each of them work in one side of the United States. One is in California and the other one is in the East Coast. So I'm really looking forward to hear what they explain to us. Please, Sasha and Jennifer, whenever.
Carmi, are you able to make me a host? Okay, wonderful.
You got it?
Yep, I got it. Give me just a second to bring this up.
All right, as Sasha's bringing up, I'll start our little introduction. So welcome to our presentation titled Inside Out Design, Connecting with the Hearts and Minds of the Adult Learner During the COVID-19 Pandemic. We want to thank you for joining us to review our knowledge and the insights that we have gained over the past few months during this continued time of change. So we're going to tell you a little bit about ourselves, our university, and our students. My name is Dr. Jenny Good. I'm assistant professor of psychology at Brandman University. I've been teaching now for over 10 years in higher education, and about the past 8 years, I've been teaching online exclusively. Currently, I teach graduate students in the marriage and family track, as well as professional clinical counseling track and dual track within our graduate program. And I also teach within undergraduate psychology as well. I am also a licensed clinical psychologist, so I'm sure you're going to see as we're talking a bit of a psychological flair as a result of that impact. So in addition to teaching full-time, I do have a day that I work in an outpatient practice, which is shifted from face-to-face to telehealth. So it's kind of an interesting perspective that I've gleaned there as well.
I'm Sasha Crowley. I'm an assistant professor in the School of Education. I started my career in the classroom as a high school English teacher, and then a personal transition when I had my son led me to Brandman University, where I started as an instructional designer, partnering with faculty to design online curriculum. And then in the fall, I transitioned to my role as full-time faculty, which has been incredibly rewarding and presented some unprecedented challenges as of late. So a little bit about our university. Brandman is definitely a student-centered institution. When Tricia was talking, there's a lot of connections that I saw in terms of really customizing our curriculum and our approach to making sure that our students are successful. And definitely a majority of our students are adult learners. Jenny's going to go a little bit more into those statistics.
Sure. So when we look at the mission of our university, we want to make sure that we provide our students with a dynamic education-based curriculum based on excellence, flexibility, and we have students. It's interesting, we're in a distributed model, so we have students that are online only, but then we also have over 25 campuses throughout California and Washington. So we have both the online environment and face-to-face, blended and online. So those students that we have, it's a diverse population. We have military, veterans, adult learners who are seeking career transitions. 90% of the students that we have are working while they're in the program. So some of the challenges that we're going to talk about is within those roles. The average age is 36. 58% of our graduates have one or more dependents while attending classes. So once again, managing multiple roles. About 66% of undergraduate and graduate students are women. Students of color is 61%. Active military or veterans is at 23%. And almost 90% of our students are aged 25 years or older.
So with that in mind, Bramman developed their own white paper on the ideal model, which stands for instructional design for the engaged adult learner. And so as an instructional designer and now as faculty, kind of approaching our courses with this idea that as instructors, we're in a role of a coach and a mentor. And that we're really positioned to guide students towards their goals. And as Jenny mentioned, most of our students are looking for career advancement. So we really encourage in terms of developing the curriculum and our role as instructors to really make those connections to the real world so that learning is pertinent to what our students are going through. And that's never been more important than this time that we've been in.
So now that you've heard a little about who we are, who we serve, and what we believe in, we want to talk about COVID-19. We're going to explore the impact of COVID-19, the various lenses, things that we want you to try on and consider as we're talking about COVID-19 to understand the impact, and how as a university we work to collaborate together to figure out what this new reality looks like for our present situation.
And just like Jenny said, we're going to talk about the multi-layered responses and what those look like on a practical level. And this was really a top-down approach. And I think as a result of it, it allowed us to really make sure that our students and our adjuncts and all of the different layers felt the support that they needed. So in terms of system changes, although a majority of our courses are online, we do have a significant amount of blended courses. And Jenny mentioned we have over 20 campuses in California and Washington. And so we needed to move those courses that were blended online. And that was definitely an impact on not just the students, but also our adjuncts. Because those students and adjuncts that signed up to teach or to take blended courses didn't necessarily sign up to go fully online. That was something that just kind of happened. And so as we closed physical campuses and kind of, those physical changes where everyone's working remote, from our students, instructors, and then also our support staff. So financial aid, our academic advisors, and that created a huge need for technology. Although, Bramman has been very future focused in terms of recognizing the need and demand for online, we didn't necessarily have that technology set up for everyone. We mainly operate out of Blackboard in terms of our course delivery. We also use Zoom and other technologies for communication, but not everyone had that background and training. So one of the things, we're fortunate to have a Center for Instructional Innovation that was able to increase the trainings, because it was really important for Bramman to communicate to both students and instructors that we were here to support them, that they weren't just being thrown kind of in their houses with technology without that human touch. So really using training to bridge that gap for students and instructors. And then also in terms of we're going to dive more deeply into this in future slides, but just kind of having that mindset that we're going to need to provide alternative for students, and that we're going to need to be flexible with our processes and procedures.
So let's go down to the next layer. We talked about the system layer and now the program layer. So as I mentioned before, I teach for the psychology program, graduate and undergraduate. So a lot of my graduate students are going to be clinicians in the field. And there's a number of different things that we expect for them to do. Advancements is one of them, and that basically is an oral comprehension. We typically, those who are on campus, have them on their campus with their faculty, their mentor and whatnot, to do this oral comprehension. Well, we had to move everything online, and with that, we had to help transition the students, the adjunct faculty, the full-time faculty that aren't online modality to really help with this process. Assignments, a lot of our assignments are application-based, so we want our students to interview different folks in the field, or we want them to have observations. They couldn't do that, but we still wanted in the program for it to be application-based. So we need to figure out ways to change these assignments while still meeting our course learning objectives. Emotional needs, we're going to talk about that in a little bit further, but ways that we could support our students in emotional needs. Practicum concerns, like Tricia talked about, our students are out in the field. They need this face-to-face interaction to work on their skills. So a lot of sites were closing down, or they moved to telehealth, or students were seeking practicum sites placements and we couldn't find them. So that was an additional challenge. And then also therapy hours. We have our students do 20 hours of therapy to really learn the process and whatnot. And at the time, at the start of the pandemic, we said only 5 hours could be telehealth. Well, we had to adjust that because basically you couldn't find anywhere where there was therapy that was provided face-to-face. So those were some of the challenges that we had to address within our specific program.
For our program in the credential program, obviously we had some challenges when schools were closed because our students could no longer get in the classroom. So in terms of observing teachers, working with students on tutoring projects, and many of our students are interns or have work in some capacity in school. So they were all of a sudden also tasked with distance learning. So making that transition from in-person teaching to online teaching. And so as a result, there was definitely a lot of stress. You know, in addition to that, there was a need to provide guidance for adjuncts. Many of our adjuncts in the credential program are vets. They've been teaching for a very long time. And so helping them transition from the course as they knew it to this new situation where students have to do more case studies, they have to do things virtually was definitely a challenge. And then I think too, just kind of the aspect that student teaching had also changed. So while some students had experience teaching and were able to make that transition with that kind of pedagogy and experience from the classroom, other students were learning how to teach while they were also engaging in distance learning. So there are just a lot of layers of challenges that we had to grapple with. And then additionally in our doctoral program, as Jenny mentioned, moving those advancements to candidacy online, anything that was done in person needed to be done online, which was definitely a major shift for all involved. And we kind of touched on this a little bit, but in terms of the student level, we definitely had students that were balancing a lot. Jenny mentioned that most of our students, a significant portion, have dependents. And so just thinking of my own students, not only were they transitioning to distance learning as the teacher, they were also transitioning to distance learning as a parent. And as a parent myself, and I know Jenny can relate to this, it's been a huge shift for our family. So there's just a lot of stressors that are new and unprecedented that students are dealing with. And so that kind of leads into mental health concerns, but then also students, whether they were personally experiencing some health concerns or caring for others, or just, you know, the stress of being concerned about their loved ones was something that they were dealing with. And then obviously those of our students who were facing financial insecurity, whether it was loss of their job or just thinking about the future. Will there be, opportunities for them to apply for jobs in this new normal? And then just the difficulty, and I'm sure we all can relate to this, of focusing right now with so much uncertainty about where we're at, the future, and just the timeline of when things might transition back to a little bit more normalcy. And in addition, obviously our instructors too are facing an impact of just balancing personal and professional obligations. And one of the things that we noticed with students is that there was an increase in need of both communication and support. I think with our role at Bramman and just kind of the students that we attract, that they were really looking to instructors for guidance. And as a result of that, that definitely increased the amount of time that instructors were spending communicating. And then I touched on this on a previous slide. There was definitely a huge transition with changing assignments with the stay-at-home order. In our program, we mentioned that fieldwork assignments needed to be virtualized and changed into case studies. And then, as Jenny mentioned, with her clinical hours, everything had to be moved to telehealth.
So now that you've seen some of the different system lenses with the university, we wanted to talk about the psychological impact. So it's putting on a new set of lenses here. As we're able to understand this impact, we can then understand our students and then the needs that are present within the classroom and the overall system. So we could have a different training on each of these areas, and we're just going to get a little snippet because there's really so much to consider. But trauma, some of our students are having traumatic responses. There's this different competing roles within their lives, within their duties of their family, jobs, significant others, so many different challenges. And as a result, they're having this struggle and this push and pull between this battle of competence and confidence, working to balance out these roles in their life. And we know that this is the formula for potential trauma to be experienced. We're working to refuel our bodies, and we feel overextended. Trauma might occur. As a result of COVID-19, there are real direct threats to our lives and those that we know. We're vicariously witnessing trauma through media, maybe supporting other individuals, or directly experiencing trauma by becoming ill or isolated or experiencing the plight of those that we're close with. I know a lot of students who have significant other spouses that are nurses and they're on the front line, so they've experienced some of that traumatic response. And what we might see in our students is avoidance, numbness, shame. They might disappear. I know Tricia talked about this in her presentation. And this could be a traumatic response. We noticed that they were one way in a class and all of a sudden they're acting a little bit differently. Students might not even recognize the shift within their behaviors. So as we're looking at these different bubbles, take into account that this might be a trauma response that you're seeing. Now, another big area, and this one I could really go on all day, is grief and loss. Every one of us is experiencing some sort of grief and loss. There's a collective sorrow about it. Everyone is losing something right now, and we're feeling that loss. We might not recognize it as loss, but that's what it is. There's individual losses with illness, death, future goals, finances, jobs. A communal grief. Students are watching their healthcare systems, their education systems, economic systems destabilized, and these are different systems that we depend on in our lives. So we have a communal grief. We have losing faith within systems that we rely on. So perhaps maybe they relied on these systems that I've talked about and they're not there, or they're altered in some way. So students are feeling confused about understanding that world around us. Sense of self within this. There's possibly some attachments that students or any of us had within our life before. So attachments with projects, possessions, people, places, ambiguous losses that really threaten our sense of self and security. We're not really sure what to connect to and who to connect with. We can't predict these losses. And as a result, the losses keep going and going and going. And students are left with feeling with who am I and what is my identity surround? And then chronic grief. We know that we have the expected grief, the communal grief, things that everyone is going through, but we might have students that it goes beyond that extent, that they start to delve into the realm of chronic grief, which then could be connected and looped back into a trauma response. And then we have anxiety. Keep in mind that anxiety is tied in hand with depression. Right now, we don't have any sort of clear time boundary. I mean, states in the United States are opening up. They're going to different levels. In Pennsylvania, where I live, we have different counties doing different things, but there's no real clear time boundaries. We're not sure when we're going to feel in that new normal or that sense of safety. There aren't really any answers. We feel like we're always waiting for answers, and it takes a toll on our minds, our bodies. We need to recognize this stress to become aware of it so it doesn't overwhelm us. The fear of uncertainty and unknown, bombardment with media, with information that contradicts with one another, and not really sure what to believe or what to consider when we're within our life. And then worries. We have finances, health, all those things that I've talked about, and depression. We're alone. We feel isolated, disconnected. Students might have a hard time figuring out what is my purpose, what is my motivation, and all this again is connected with anxiety and that feeling of being overwhelmed. So you might be thinking, this is great, Jenny. You know, I'm glad that I can understand trauma, grief, depression, anxiety, but I'm not a psychologist. What does this mean for me? Well, there are things that we can do and things that we can take away when we're working to try on those different lenses. We can provide a space for reactions, acceptance of difficulties, allowing for that connection to figure out, well, this is what you're experiencing. We can discuss messages with our students within our systems related to self-care and wellness. We can connect with students that are about to disappear. We can provide normalization. This is what we're all experiencing. We can connect with students through presence, email, communication, allowing for the experience that we're all experiencing to be a part of the class. We can confirm identity and successes. Our students are still students. Work on identifying their strengths and connecting it within the coursework, within our feedback. We can provide boundaries within our courses and time management. This will allow our students to feel safe and to have that structure that they need and want so badly. We can adapt processes and policies to help with students and to support them. And we can provide a community to allow the students to know they aren't alone, to allow them to see that they do have a purpose and value within their coursework and how this is connected to their education and occupational goals, to celebrate successes that they're experiencing in the course.
And that's a great transition, this empowered tone, to talk about Bramman's empowered response. I think that we really felt as a university that with the infrastructure, technology, and just the communication processes that were already in place, that we were really well positioned to be a leader in this new normal in terms of providing guidance, providing support, providing a voice, and really connecting with our students. So the first thing that Bramman did was to really prioritize communication and engagement. And I think that what's so important about communication is making sure that our students know that we see them and that we recognize their contributions. One of the aspects of Bramman is that we have some guild partnerships with different organizations, and one of them being Walmart. And so one of the early initiatives was to create a video for our Walmart students just to recognize their contributions during this time where they're on the front lines as essential workers. So I'm going to take a moment to show you a short clip. And I'm going to do just a short sound check. Jenny, can you hear that okay?
Yes.
Hello to all of our students who work for Walmart. During these times, we are all being asked to step up to the plate and to serve our communities. This is especially true of you. I want to thank you for everything you've already done for us, whether it's serving customers by ringing them up, stocking shelves, or working longer hours to meet demand, or all of the above. Whatever your role is, we want to thank you from the bottom of our hearts and let you know.
So we just wanted to share a short clip, but I think the important part is to really put a face.
That we appreciate you.
Oops.
I work with the Walmart students attending Brandman University, and I'm so proud of all the hard work that they've done.
I think I paused it successfully that time. Go back to our presentation. Sometimes technology works with you, sometimes it does not. Okay, let's go ahead and get our slide going again. So one of the things that we really wanted to do is put a face with appreciation, and to really make sure that students knew that we knew what they were contributing during this time, and to maintain engagement on their end as well.
So another thing that we were thinking about is personalizing the message. One of the things that our program did, and you'll see a little slide there, is that we had student town hall meetings for our undergraduate and graduate program, where we were able to address the concerns and to give them some tips and strategies for reframing their experience and connecting with them. So town hall meetings was one of the examples in this area. We already shared the video. Working to exhibit flexibility and grace within the classroom is important as well. Helping to ensure that there's rigor, and we want them to learn the material, but recognizing all those things that we talked about and what we're all experiencing. Connecting with students also, and that could be with the Zoom meetings, emails, video announcements. I know personally as an instructor, that's one way with personalizing the message that I felt the most impact during these past few terms is just those connections, those intentional connections that I've worked to build with my students to really personalize the message and get that one-on-one interaction and support for my students.
Yeah, and I think that that's a great transition to the need that was seen immediately of providing training. We were fortunate that we were up and running with Zoom at the time, and we have a lot of technology infrastructure to support the transition to fully remote learning. However, that didn't necessarily mean that everyone had had the training to ensure best practices, because while you can communicate effectively and personalize the message, if you can't operate the technology effectively, it's not going to ensure the engagement of students and properly deliver the message. So we mentioned the Center for Instructional Innovation. They upped their trainings to make sure that any instructors that hadn't used Zoom before or students that needed extra support, with the understanding that this wasn't necessarily a choice. This was something that many had kind of been forced into. And so really taking a gentle approach, if you will, a kind approach of just really supporting the humans that are involved in this situation, and as much as possible connecting them with best practices, and just continuing to keep up our offerings to make sure that we're communicating that there is training and support available to make this transition effective.
So transitioning into that, as we're working to support our faculty, we're also working to figure out ways that we can take care of our own. You're going to see up there, there is a screenshot of a program that we started. Our human resources department, I just think has been amazing. And one of the things that they did is start this well-traveled program. So with this program, we're signing up on teams, and this is helping to provide physical wellness. We have these different goals that we're working on and working to attend to getting at least 10,000 steps in, and also some other little goals. And it's competitive, but it's also an atmosphere where the whole community has been involved to connect with this component of wellness during this time when we're feeling disconnected. There's been a faculty member who is also leading weekly mindfulness sessions that anyone can attend. So another way that we're working to take care of our own. Our faculty governance has led, I believe it's monthly coffee breaks where we just can get together and talk about how we're doing. And then, as I said before, to echo on human resources, I believe it's weekly, at least weekly, they've been sending out information about wellness so that we're continuing to reflect upon what we're doing to take care of ourselves and each other during this time period.
And one of the additional things that many of our faculty have taken the lead on is serving our community. Because of the experiences that we've had in our role as online educators, we felt very well positioned to share best practices with the community, as well as collect resources. One of our faculty in School of Education created a very robust Google Doc that had links for pretty much any topic you could think of, from distance learning for early education to secondary, middle school, as well as socio-emotional learning needs, and special education, which has been severely impacted as a result of the pandemic. Also, we have been hosting webinars on a variety of topics, everything from helping children manage stress to helping families transition. This one in particular that's on your screen right now has to do with preparing curriculum for the new normal. It seems pretty eminent that schools, K-12 as well as universities, are not going to be going back to normal in the fall. So we've really been thinking about what can we do as a university to really serve our community at large, to share our knowledge and expertise and just really communicate our support for them. So I see our time is running short, so I'm just going to touch on these briefly. We really wanted to share with you some of the things that we've learned in terms of tips for success. One of the really important things that we've seen is that the cognitive load for our students, for our adjunct staff across the boards has just been kind of at a peak. And so really, there were so many powerful things that Jenny shared about the individual impacts that we've all been going through, and just keeping that front of mind when we're making decisions, and being realistic, not just for our students, but also for ourselves. And really leaning into this idea that as we make adjustments and modification, that the goal is student success. And so that really needs to be top of mind in terms of achieving our outcomes in education. Definitely communication needs to be frequent and intentional, and really embracing this role as a role model for students, of modeling those healthy strategies, highlighting what we can control, as Jenny mentioned, and then also just kind of honoring diverse experiences. I think it's really important. If you haven't heard the TED Talk, The Danger of a Single Story, it's so powerful about the danger that we all face of equating one experience to represent the whole group. I did a kind of a warm-up activity with my students about 2 months after shelter in place had taken effect, about what were the silver linings. And at that point, I kind of assumed everyone had turned the corner, and yet I had one student that said that she still can't find any silver linings to this pandemic. So that was really an important aha moment for myself, of just realizing that we are all still in process. There's going to be waves of grief, trauma, and anxiety, as Jenny already mentioned. And we really need to recognize the diversity of experience.
So to close, oh, sorry, go ahead, Sasha.
That's okay. So just a few of our successes. I think definitely resilience. We've really grown stronger as a community. We've cultivated new skills, and we're also developing competencies that are really helping us to make the transition easier.
So now, to close out, we wanted just to share a couple of testimonials from our students. This quote was from a student that attended the graduate town hall meeting. What I liked within that hour was that faculty members gave information, asked questions to concerned students, as well as gifted resources and amenities so that we can get through this time with ease and optimum support. The faculty members, in my mind, were clinical mental health professionals or caseworkers for us in that meeting. They provided support, care, emotional response, and information to allow us some peace. This is what clinical mental health professionals would do with their clients. And then the second quote is one from a student that I had this past spring 2 term. I had an extremely difficult class session due to the pandemic. Dr. Good was extremely encouraging, kind, thoughtful, and understanding throughout the course. Regardless of the course of the class, Dr. Good gave me the ability to persevere to complete all my schoolwork, even after falling overtly ill. 10 out of 10.
I made Jenny keep that 10 out of 10. That's exactly what we want. This is from one of my students. This course started during the pandemic and there was no way for any of us to be okay. That said, I think Professor Crowley went over and beyond to make sure the class was okay. She offered multiple opportunities for us to learn the information, and she was patient and empathetic during what is an unprecedented time. Bravo to her for staying strong for us. It could not have been easy. She's a class act and I will miss her. So just kind of emphasizing the power of embracing the role as a role model and guide during this difficult time. Jenny and I are so grateful to be part of this webinar and to share our experiences. Our contact information is up there. We're so glad to connect with you virtually across oceans and countries. And we wish you all the best in this time.
So thank you very much, Sasha and Jenny. It's been a very interesting presentation, I think, a bit different from the other 3 that we had, and it's quite interesting to see the soft part of things sometimes, because we sometimes concentrate a lot about economics and more about courses itself and text, and it's nice to connect with with more internal feelings and how people feel about the situation and how we can help them to cope. So it's been quite interesting. I would like to see if I get back the host rights, because then we can actually invite Tricia, please, to join us again.
I did give you host rights,
Wonderful.
So you should have what you need.
Wonderful. Yes, good. And I have a few questions for you. And let's see. Okay. So just hold on, because then I'll have the names as well. Let me see. No, it's not this one. It's this one. Sorry. So if you open the question and answer board, you will see the questions there, but I'll read them loud for everybody to listen to hear. So Derek Barter from Maynooth University in Ireland is asking to Tricia. He says, we are lucky in that most of our courses were 3/4 through before the switch to remote teaching happening. This meant the classes were well established. We would usually spend the first couple of classes building trust and forming group. Have you any suggestion on starting courses online?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it's a difficult transition, especially if they're brand new courses where you haven't had face-to-face contact with the students already. I will tell you, there's a ton of literature out there about how to build virtual relationships. I'm a little biased because that's what my dissertation was on. So I get a little excited about this and could talk for another couple hours about it. The big thing is building trust. It's harder to build solid trust in virtual relationships. And trust actually comes from tasks and how you complete tasks. So in virtual relationships, one of the best ways to build trust is to do simple tasks and do them in the way that you promise you would do them. So the example I always give my staff and faculty is make sure if you tell students you're going to answer emails within 24 hours, you answer them within 24 hours. If you tell them you're going to answer within an hour, make sure you're answering within an hour. Whatever your guideline is, give them that information and follow through on that. If you tell them you're going to grade things within 1 week, make sure you have it graded and back, because those tasks and how you perform on those specific tasks are what students know how students know that they can buy into you and trust you. And once you have that basic trust built, then you can work on the relational piece, but the relational piece has to be intentional. You have to be reaching out. You have to talk. I love how Sasha and Jenny talked about reaching out to students, asking them, giving them opportunities, checking in to make sure people are okay. You can't just guess in a virtual environment, and you should never assume what's happening with someone. You always have to ask and provide those opportunities.
Good, thank you. There is another question for you, Tricia. It's from Lucilia Santos from Portugal. And she says, how will practical skills be developed if laboratorial classes have to be taught online, even sometimes supported by simultaneous in engineering degrees, teaching degrees, etc.?
Right. Yeah, that's another really, really great question. And that's a harder question almost. I think it depends on the discipline. So in the United States, at least in healthcare, there are a lot of products out there that have started with simulations. So we use in our health sciences and our nursing programs, we have a lot of simulation programs that we use for students. Those have been working great. Video, everybody's gotten used to video now. So having students demonstrate things on video or doing video interactions, you can do video simulations, video role plays, things like that as well. I think the reality is that there are some things that just have to be face-to-face. And I'll give you an example. My daughter's a college student and she's in technical theater, and she was supposed to have a welding class this spring. Well, there wasn't going to be any welding happening at our house, right? We don't have the equipment for that. We don't have the things that they need. So there are some things that are probably going to have to stay face-to-face to some extent, but you can also get super creative with a lot of other stuff in terms of the simulations and videos and things you can do to create those interactions. And there's tons of products out there too. And then the last thing I will say on that is if there isn't a product for what you need, start talking to whoever it is in your organization that could help that. I had a real need for something for one of our programs, and I started talking to publishers, and it took about 4 years, but then we got the simulation that we needed, and it's fabulous. And that company, their business has been booming since the pandemic started because so many other schools started using that simulation. So sometimes if you rattle enough cages, you can get what you need. It takes a little while, but if you keep rattling, something will happen.
Okay, thank you. Then there is a question, there are two questions actually from Christina Paulus from Vienna in Austria, but I think that probably the three of you could answer this. She says, how do you support people to connect and to exchange and socialize? And then there is another question which I link it, which says, do students connect with international students too? For example, with the students from Europe?
Jenny and Sasha, do you want to take this since I'm already talking quite a bit?
Sure. Sasha, I'll start with the first one, and if you want to add on to it too. So connection, I feel like, especially within our campus, like we mentioned, we had some students that were face-to-face and they were forced online, and we tend to get that resistance from the very get-go, and I experienced it since I'm online only all the time. But with those students, it is a process. Often once they start to see the technology and they become comfortable with it, and I honestly get to reflect some of my discomfort too. I hate being on video, but I do it because I connect with my students and then they connect with me. I post weekly video announcements. Again, I let them know I don't like it, but it helps to start to build a community of support where they see my face every week, all the time. And I've had students often say that, you're not there where I can't see them in the classroom, but I feel like it's been a classroom experience. So I think it's putting myself out there, being human, recognizing that I have those discomforts too, rolling with it. And then once they get over that initial anxiety, that fear, they start to connect too. So there's some other ways too, but I'll let Sasha go if she wants to talk about how she connects too with her students.
Yeah, I mean, I think something as simple as I just make it a point to have like a friendly greeting whenever I respond to students in an email. So they might be sassy or sarcastic in their email, but I always start with thank you for reaching out, or hope you are doing well. Hope you and your loved ones are staying safe and sane. And I think that, you know, what we've seen in this transition is that a lot of that informal conversation, that if I ran into Jenny in the hall, the first thing I would say is like, hey, how are you doing? And making sure that when we're communicating with students, whether it's announcements or email, that we're really keeping that human touch. Jenny brought up video. That's a great way to do it. One of the things that I've started doing is starting my Zoom classes with music. If I was holding a class in person, I would totally have music playing when people come in. It's just a great way to set the stage for learning. And so thinking about those things that you would do in person and seeing how you might be able to virtualize them creates that trust that Tricia mentioned. That's so important to effective learning and just connecting with people at large. And I think one of the things too that I would recommend is, if it's possible, to pick up the phone and call a student or meet with them in Zoom rather than just go back and forth with them over email. That's another great way to really boost that human connection, because something different happens when you can hear someone's voice and even see their face than just going back and forth electronically.
Okay, thank you very much, Sasha. And there is one more question for Jenny this time. It says, it's from Emilia Kramenko from Romania, and it says, indeed, communication and emotional support for our students are highly needed. Unfortunately, more training for teachers is needed also, along with teaching skills for an e-learning environment. Burnout is the new trend. Can you provide us with your experience related to the support provided for teachers?
Sure. So I think it somewhat goes back to some of the lenses that we talked about. Some of the things that we didn't mention was that our chancellor, he sent out, for a time being, he was doing weekly addresses to us where he was connecting with the entire system to say, this is what we're doing, this is where we're at, so that we could find that connection. So I know you talked about training, but also that's related to burnout, that we have those connections, those touch points, that human interaction, even if it's on the computer, that our chancellor was going to be there every Monday morning at 2 o'clock to connect with us. So that was one great way that we, I think, felt that connection would help to prevent burnout. I think also we had a lot of communication where it was a daily Brandman in the news, where we would get these resources about, this is what's happening in California, this is happening in Washington, this is what's happening all over the place. And then enclosed too was, how can we connect and support you with these various resources and allow you to feel connected but supported. So I think some of those things in particular helped as an overall system. But then when I think more about what I do, especially to help my instructors, is we are course mentors. So for anyone that is taking or teaching any of the courses that I design, every term, the term regularly, I reach out to them to say, I'm the instructor of this course. Well, since COVID-19, I've added a little bit more personalization to that process, making sure that they know, please reach out to me if you need support with teaching in Zoom, if you need support with this, that, or the other, to really let them know that I'm there. So we already have that mentoring process in place, but I've worked to try and bump it up even more so during this time period to let them know that they're not alone, to reach out, that we are here. So I think that course mentoring process is helping to guide them to grow, but also give them the support that they need so that they can hopefully prevent burnout.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Jenny. I have two very quick questions, one for Tricia and one for you two. I don't know. Tricia, is a very practical question, because I was thinking that you do a lot of work on health education, and I was just wondering, is that correct? Your institution?
We do. We have a school of health sciences.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering if the COVID-19 has actually make you develop a curriculum about how to take care of COVID-19 people who have illness, and how to train the nurses or the hospitals.
Yeah, great question. And And yes, so there is actually, and I promise I'm not here to like plug my institution and to get you all to enroll, but there is actually Purdue University Global developed a free contact tracing course where people can take this course. There's no cost whatsoever. And they learn the principles of contact tracing and why that's important and how that's playing into this public health pandemic. And that actually free for anybody who wants to take it. We know that from a job aspect, contact tracing is probably going to be a big deal. And there's going to be lots of opportunities out there at both an individual job level, and then corporations are going to want to be doing those things. So they have that. Our curriculum for our health sciences and nursing students, and to some extent our psychology students as well, is being updated as we can. It's really hard right now because there isn't any standard that you can give a student on, this is the protocol for caring for COVID patients. Not like a broken leg. We know what protocols are and we know how we're doing that. There's not anything set yet. We're all still trying to figure it out. We have gone back to a lot of basics in terms of infection control and preventing the spread of diseases and pathogens and things like that, and really emphasizing that with our students, so that we're just making sure that they're fresh on all of that, especially before they're out at clinical sites. And we'll continue to adjust curriculum as we need to, as more information comes in, but we need some solid guidance from the medical professionals. And at this point, nobody's totally sure how to manage these patients.
Okay, it's quite interesting. But I think that something will be needed everywhere, because it's, as we've mentioned it, we don't want to say it, but they say there will be waves. And if it's not COVID-19, maybe it will be COVID-21. So we need to develop things for the future. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think that's the hardest thing. People want black and white answers, and there aren't black and white answers right now. So we're giving people the best information we have right now, but that might change. And tomorrow that best information might be different than what it is.
Totally.
So, thank you.
My last question or comment for Sasha and Jenny, because when I was listening to your presentation, I mean, you talk about all this stress and anxiety, and of course we have all been like that, because we are not used in Spain. Definitely, we are not used to be inside home doing nothing else but home. And but I was just wondering if you have kind of identified that in something happening in US, like I think this happened in Europe, and is that suddenly people has become a little bit more sympathetic with other people and understanding. And also, I actually think that this situation is global, and we feel kind of we are united because we have all the same problem. So yes, it is very challenging on one hand, but it's giving us kind of opportunities, and it's actually giving us a different thing on the other hand. And I can tell you that we probably would have not had this seminar across the Atlantic unless COVID-19 had happened. So at least one thing is good about it. So what do you think, Sasha and Jenny? Do you think that there is also developed something in human, because we had to stop and think and be careful, but something that it was not there?
Yeah, in fact, last night I shared a spoken poem with my class by George the poet called The Power of Collaboration. I highly recommend it. And essentially the sentiment was that this is an unprecedented time because of the need for collaboration. And you mentioned this international webinar, which would not have happened otherwise. Another thing too that I've noticed is just in neighborhoods, we're actually connecting with our neighbors because there's nowhere else to go. And I think it's really boosting that sense of community. And I also think too, I mean, one of the things that I've noticed as challenging is it's been, I have a 4-year-old and a 7-year-old, of having them at home and distance learning and all of that fun stuff, is just the family time. I think my kids are living their best life. It's kind of an American expression, but they're doing, they're loving it. I think they think they're like in an endless summer scenario. So That's definitely some of the positives that I've noticed of just the simplicity of this time is boosting those connections.
Yeah, to agree a lot of what Sasha stated, and I was just thinking, I think it causes us to pause and to think about our values. Sasha's mentioning family. So what does matter most to us? And this is what I do with a lot of my therapy clients too, when they're looking on that lens of all that I can, and this is taken away. Well, what do you still have? What can you dig into? So I think it's caused all of us to look into that individually, and then it's spread out. So I still have my family, and like Sasha, I've got 3 young kiddos, and they are just loving life right now. So as a parent, I tend to put on the lens and say, oh no, she's missing her last few months of kindergarten. Oh no, he's going to be in kindergarten next year. But they are not thinking that way. So it's really digging into our values, what we do have, what we can do. And it's kind of reminded me, like, even about our title, Inside Out Design. So how can we flip things and look at things from a different perspective and a different lens, individually, communally, globally, to what we can do, what we do have, slow down, and to really just sit into that and enjoy the experience of the good things in life.
So thank you very much, because I think it's been a very, very enjoyable session for me, and it's been really great to have you from across the Atlantic, and I hope you also have enjoyed. I know that Sasha, you were very, very early when we started. You were sleeping, but we were thinking about you already. But thank you very much, and I think that please stay, because we have one final thing to say, and it would be nice if everybody stays here, but you can go now.